Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Human Trafficking Part 1. My name is Jessica Musaware, and I'll be your host. I work as a mental health specialist here at Serving Children and Reaching Families, and I'm excited to be hosting this session today. Before I hand the mic over to our speaker, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about this presentation and the webinar platform. First, as an attendee, you will be in listen-only mode and will not be able to verbally communicate during the webinar. Other participant names are not visible to those in listen-only mode. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question for our speaker, please feel free to send it through the questions panel at the bottom of your player. We'll be answering questions at the end of the session. Options for computer audio are listed on your screen. You may use your computer microphone or speakers, however, a headset is recommended. Telephone options are listed on your screen as well. Today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session and is accessible through the Serving Children and Reaching Families site as well as on the YouTube site. I am pleased to introduce today's speaker, Mary Farfan. Mary has 12 years of experience working in the human services field. With a bachelor's in counseling, Mary is a certified behavioral mental health case manager. She has worked as a refugee, youth, and family specialist, serving refugees, human trafficking, torture, and genocide survivors from 43 countries in the process of readjustment, counseling, social recreational activities, learning English, and recovery. She believes that recovery is possible when given the right mental health, medical, and social services for anyone who seeks a better life. So now, without any further ado, please welcome Mary Farfan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Jessica, for that great introduction and beautiful introduction as well. Let's talk about child sex trafficking, Part 1, a basic introduction to the violence and tragedy our children face. Out of the Shadows is the shining light on the response to the child sexual abuse and exploitation is an economist intelligence unit, an EIU research program supported by the World Childhood Foundation and the Oak Foundation with additional support from the Carson Family Foundation. It is based on a country-level benchmarking index that evaluates how stakeholders are responding to the scourge of sexual violence against children in 43 countries, including the United States. These 40 countries represent 70% of the world's children and will help to assess the progress toward reaching the Sustainable Development Goal 16.2, ending abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against and torture of children by 2030. As you can see, currently US scored 73.7 out of 100. So let's talk about the national snapshot. 68% of these children have been in the care of child welfare when they were missing. Every year, at least over 5,000 victims are identified. I'll say around over 1,500 minors, which is 31.4%, 90% female, 8% male, 0.5% transgender. Native children, youth, are 5 times more likely than peers to be trafficked. The first of its kind federal human trafficking report, as a matter of fact, was released in April of last year in Washington. I remember this report, it was a project of the Human Trafficking Institute and provided an exhaustive account of all the criminal and civil human trafficking cases handled by the federal court during 2017. This team was made of 12 attorneys and 8 law school students reviewing every human trafficking case in the federal court system of 2017. So this was a first-time report ever made as of last year, and it's supposed to be making everyone this, everyone from now on. So what is child sex trafficking according to the Department of Children and Families? As you can see, it entails and is included to sexual exploiting a minor, recruiting, enticing, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining minors by any means for the purpose of sexual exploitation. Exploiting a minor through survival sex, exchanging sex or sexual acts for money or something of value such as shelter, food, or drugs. Possibly using a minor in child pornography, exploiting a minor through sex tourism, mail order bride trade, or early marriage, or exploiting a minor by having him or her perform in sexual venues like strip clubs. Sex trafficking is defined as a commercial sex as you read, because it is the mere fact that the victim is a child and the act meets the definition of a commercial sex act, which makes most likely the child a victim. So where does sex trafficking occur? As you have read on the news, it happens in a lot of places, such as schools, group homes, parlors, public events. Super Bowl is one of them, very popular one. I remember reading about this case last January. It was a very popular case in Polk County because I mean Hillsborough County, because it was about 7 adults that were arrested because they were accused of luring a teen using him as a sex slave. These 7 suspects used this 15-year-old boy as a sex slave for nearly a year, keeping him in a filthy trailer in St. Petersburg. Now, there was another teen, a second teen from Louisiana, who was also kept by these suspects. So how did this happen? Well, it was through social media. These teenagers were lured by the promise of a better life in a chatting gaming app in Play Store calling Discord. They entered this app and they were chatting with some people, and then this is how they got lured into a better life with false promises, and then they were used as sex slaves for over a year, as you see. So this is one of the many examples of how sex trafficking occurs. Subsequently, we're going to see a video about an example of a girl that was a victim as well of sexual trafficking. Sorry, we're having some little difficulties, but we're going to see this video. So let's take a look at this survivor story. She's from Seattle, but she's sharing her story about how she was a victim of sex trafficking as well.
When I was 15, I had my father. He was on drugs real bad. He was a crackhead. And also, he was an alcoholic. He abused me from when I was 12 until I was 15. He raped me. I believe it was more than once because when I was 12 and I used to visit him on the weekends up until I was 15, he used to beat me if I wouldn't smoke crack with him or drink with him. And he told me that he just didn't want to get high on his own, but I think it's more so he was always molesting me. I was staying with my friend Juanita, and she told me that she knows this guy that can help me make to be a model, and was asking me was I okay with that, and I said yeah. I really wanted to pursue modeling. I can't remember how old I was, but I started wanting to be a model when I was a kid. I used to dream about it, like not only like in my dreams, but wake up dreaming like, yes, I want to be a model. This is what I want to do. I was 17 at the time when I met him, and I got in the adult entertainment business because of the fact that he asked me about it, and he told me the money would be used towards the modeling, and I believed him. When he told me about the adult entertainment business, I didn't understand that it was an upscale call girl. I wasn't even aware of the fact that it was prostitution. They use us young people because they can get older women to do what they want to do because they believe we're young and we're naive, and we're, nine small 10 they're right, and that's why they go for the younger people to target, because they know they're going to get someone their age to do what they're asking them to do, and they know that they can feed off of that. Everything I did as far as prostitution goes, he got all the money. I didn't keep nothing from him. And that's the crazy part of it all, because I really believed it was for the modeling. I really thought this was a real legit thing. And somehow I found myself into this dirty game that I really believed it was a real job of modeling, and it wasn't. He beat me. He had me in hotel rooms by myself for weeks, go hungry because I wouldn't obey what he wanted me to do. It's a trap. Once you're there, it's hard to get out of. It's really hard. I really thought that if I didn't leave, he probably was going to kill me because I didn't want no longer to be a prostitute. So I had to ask myself, is this something I still want to do, or do I want out? And if so, I had a chance leaving and risking him coming after me and killing me, because either which way, he might end up killing me regardless. I have learned I was a victim. At the time, I didn't believe I was, because I was like, hey, I volunteered. But at the end of the day, I didn't volunteer. It's something I was tricked into, thinking I can turn out to be a model. So I have learned, like, I really didn't sign up for this. And I'm glad I got away, because I was able to repair myself and my mom's relationship. And I was able to accomplish my goals. Finally, when I left him, I went back to school. I'm now a certified nursing assistant. I'm also a PCT, which is a patient care technician. Everything I've been through and gone through is what changed my whole attitude. I want to be a certified nursing assistant. I want to be a registered nurse. I want to help people genuinely, to where I want to give back. So definitely, that's why I said if I can help one person, I'm grateful for that. If you're a victim and you went through this, there is justice for you, definitely. Not only is there justice for you, you don't have to be scared anymore once you elaborate and go to the police, because they will be arrested, to where, to me, you can breathe. I can breathe and say I can finally put him behind me. And so I'm okay where I'm at now.
Okay, as you have seen in the video, this was um, this was a situation wherein she was pulled into with false promises of a better life or a better future, like modeling in her case. So why does exploitation happen? There are some push factors, and as you can see, some of them are homelessness, discrimination, lack of opportunity, lack of education. Um, the push factor, the main is the demand. The demand is a push factor in the criminal business, at least for sex trafficking. Demand is created by men and women, predominantly men, who seek to purchase sex or sexual entertainment from persons who have been subject to force, fraud, or coercion, or who are under the age of 18 years old and are involved in commercial sex. Now, what are the pull factors? As you can see, there's some financial desires, like this other girl was speaking about, the modeling. Um, there is support and love, these false opportunities to have a better life. Like I spoke to you about these teenagers that were lured into a better life, and then they believed them and then ended up being sex slaves for over a year. And just like them, there's plenty of cases of children, minors, who have been lured into this kind of things. One of the push factors coming from within the family home or the homes that child was living in could be about domestic abuse, sexual abuse, or just general unhappiness, typical teenage angst. trying to push back parental boundaries, So we can consider the pushes that might encourage the young person to run, and then we look at the pulls. That will be where the outside factors that encourage the young person to run. For instance, when the young person is being groomed or invited to parties inside the home, parents are saying they can't go, but outside the home, the pull is much, much stronger. So, child sexual exploitation has long-term effects on young people's social integration and economic well-being, and may adversely affect their life chances. Some of the difficulties faced by victims include isolation from family and friends, teenage parenthood, failing examinations or dropping out of education altogether, unemployment, mental health problems, suicide attempts, alcohol and drug addiction, aggressive behavior, and criminal activity are few of the many impacts that these children have to endure. Now, these influences impacting the risk of sex trafficking are divided in four. I divided in four: society, a community, relationship, and individual. Reports indicate that traffickers often target children and youths with a history of sexual abuse, dating violence, low self-esteem, and minimal social support. Possible risk factors associated with child trafficking include the following: history of childhood trauma and abuse, like mental, physical, sexual, children and youth in foster care, history of involvement with the juvenile justice system, children and youth in group homes and shelters, lack of supervision, homelessness, a history of running away, LGBTQ youth, youth living in poverty, and youth experiencing or in families with mental health issues or substance abuse issues. Now, as we were talking about some of these things, we have to take a look at the characteristics of how children are pulled into this. They may experience feelings of betrayal, powerlessness, stigmatization, and traumatic sexualization. Often express a lack of desire for help despite needing assistance with getting basic emotional, medical, and legal needs. Often will not self-identify as victims and will minimize or be unable to recognize exploitation or victimization. Perhaps more than effective than threatening trafficking victims with harm or death is threatening them with the injury or death of a close family member, such as parents, siblings, or children. Sometimes they're afraid that somebody of their loved ones are going to be hurt, and therefore they submit and will take it. Victims are also kept isolated from the community in which they are residing so as to remain undetected by authorities and to prevent the victims from gaining access to resources that could help them escape their situation. It is not uncommon for trafficking rings to cycle out the individuals, constantly keeping them from moving in order to keep them isolated and disoriented as to where they are. So as we're reading some of these characteristics, let's discuss what is Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome is a very common illness sex trafficking victims endure. This syndrome, also known as traumatic bonding, is where victims find it challenging to leave their abusers. Now, how? Well, this is because victims use their Stockholm Syndrome as a survival mechanism. They are petrified to leave their abusers in fear of being physically harmed or killed. I have read a lot of stories where teenage girls have said that they were afraid to leave because they were going to get killed by their traffickers. Sometimes victims become contingent towards their abusers for a sense of security, food, shelter, and clothes. Furthermore, hostages also portray their abusers' demeaning behavior as receptive. And this is because they develop a mindset that involves thinking like they could have done worse or they did not mean to do this. So that's how they justify the abuse. Now let's take a look more into a victim trafficking relationship. As you know, they use means of force, coercion, and fraud. Traffickers employ a variety of control tactics, including physical and emotional abuse, sexual assault, confiscation of identification and money, isolation from friends and family, and even renaming victims. Often, traffickers identify and leverage their victims' vulnerabilities in order to create dependency. They make promises aimed at addressing the needs of their target in order to impose control. As a result, victims become trapped and fear living for myriad reasons, including psychological trauma, shame, emotional attachment, or physical threats to themselves or their children's safety. And shame is, I think, one of the main ones, psychologically speaking, because when I was dealing with a lot of human trafficking victims, one of the main things that they were enduring and they were dealing with was shame. They had shame to talk about it. They have shame of what they went through, and in fact, they felt even guilty of what they have to endure. So how do we prevent sex trafficking and do this Strengthening Families Act? Well, this is an act, as a matter of fact, that was signed by President Obama in 2014. He signed this Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act into law. And this act provided various changes to existing law regarding child welfare, including some required state action in areas of foster parenting, adoption, incentive payments, and others. This bill requires certain data collection and reporting by states regarding sex trafficking, including the identification of children who may be at high risk of becoming sex trafficking victims, particularly current and former foster children. This TBPA states that a victim should not be held in custody, that they should be given information based on their victim status, and that as a victim, they should be given protection. This act recognizes that child victims are especially vulnerable and that their protection is critical in combating human trafficking. The TBPA created a special offense in protection, which sex trafficking of children under the age of 14 is punished potentially by up to life in prison. If the child was over the age of 14, but not yet 18, the punishment could reach as high as 20 years in prison. Now let's talk about understanding this impact, because when a child is being exposed and then being enduring sex trafficking, there's a lot of realms of social, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and physical impact. All abuse is traumatic and harmful to victims. But many factors in sex trafficking intensify the pain even more than if a child was solely sexually abused. Trafficked children are deprived of their natural support system. This alone deprives them of their other rights, the rights to basic needs, the right to be free from abuse and exploitation, and the right to health and education, among others. Just by losing their family, they lost a better future already. So, physical consequences of child sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is a complex problem because the victims experience physical and psychological harm. The traffickers use physical violence to dominate and control their victims. Some of the tactics include starvation, beatings, rape, and gang rape. Victims also experience violence and harm from some of the people who are purchasing the sex acts. Common injuries include broken bones, concussions, burns, and brain trauma. Victims can also experience gynecologic health problems that stem from forced commercial sex acts. They might suffer from sexually transmitted diseases, menstrual pain and irregularities, miscarriages, and forced abortions, among other problems. I want to share with you this case. It's a case study. I'll read that with you. Carrie and Amy's mother was from Scotland, and she married a U.S. citizen and came to Hawaii. Their parents divorced when they were 10 and 11 years old. Their mother, starting drinking heavily after the divorce, became homeless and lived on the streets. Carrie and Amy were sent to a group home at ages 13 and 14, but would run away on the weekends to be with their mother. Carrie started working at Wendy's when she was 16. A pimp would come to the restaurant and flirt with her. Eventually, the pimp found their mother and asked if he could have her daughters. In exchange, he would give the mother food and shelter. She accepted. The pimp trafficked the girls between San Francisco and Hawaii. By the time Carrie was 19, she had had 6 abortions and 1 child. Both she and Amy, aged 18, were alcoholics. Today, the sisters are in their early 20s. Carrie has 2 kids. Amy has had 5 abortions and pelvic inflammatory disease. Both are drug addicts and homeless. This was based on the book Esther and Weiner and Human Trafficking in 2001. Now, of course, Carrie and Amy are over 30, but this has been one of the cases of out of the many on one of the effects of trafficking. Now, the psychological and behavioral effects of child sex trafficking. As you know, physical damage may heal with time. However, its psychological consequences last a lifetime. Psychological effects put victims at risk of further abuse and at risk of becoming abusers themselves. The psychological impact of victimization may be more severe than the physical violence. Traumatic flashbacks triggered by certain cues present during the abuse, isolation, sudden bursts of anger and irritability, feelings of powerlessness, depression, and extreme passivity, and mental illnesses, personality disorders, hallucinations, and suicide are some of the many, of the psychological effects of sex trafficking, minors and adults, I'll say. So what happens when the child turns into an adult and they have a family? Uh, Since certain factors such as maturity, gender, and parental support, among many other factors, influence the severity of these effects. Research shows that although effects tend to last the victim's lifetime, treatment helps lessen the symptoms of psychological trauma. And the reason why is because through treatment and to receiving all the support that you need on the mental health aspect, these children that will turn into adults will learn coping mechanisms to be able to deal with these flashbacks, with these triggers, with these traumatic incidents that could pop up any day, anytime, while they're being parents, while they're being spouses, when they're being adults. So how do we heal the traffic? As you can see, mental health professionals working with sexually exploited women and girls emphasize that trauma recovery is critical to a victim's ability to repair and regain her life. The needs of the mental health needs of survivors of sex trafficking are among the most complex of crime victims. They often benefit from a multidisciplinary approach to address severe trauma, medical needs, immigration and legal issues, financial problems, safety concerns, shelter, and other basic needs, and reintegration with their families. As you can remember from my previous human trafficking webinar, we were talking about the multidisciplinary approach in regards to these issues with mental health and human trafficking, sex trafficking survivors. So what are these victim needs? We talk about safety, medical care. Sometimes they do need legal assistance. And I want to really concentrate on trauma-informed response, trauma-informed approach. Because because the needs of these victims are, as we mentioned, the most complex. So using trauma-informed approach also helps produce better case results for law enforcement. For example, it leads to more effective interviews of victims and witnesses. It maximizes the chances of cooperation with law enforcement, and it helps structure the search for evidence to present a trauma-informed story in court to the fact finder, judge or jury, and for the purposes of pretrial litigation. In the end, the jury will need to understand the effects of trauma to properly evaluate testimony and credibility in reaching just a verdict. While each individual's experience of trauma may be different, it is important to understand how it can tax the individual's coping resources and lead to the initiation of biologically driven survival strategies. Trauma may be the result of a single event, maybe witnessing, experiencing a violent act, or a series of ordeals like long-term abuse, for example, sexual trafficking. The majority of trafficking situations are the culmination of many traumatic experiences, most of which are untreated. Trauma affects how victims see themselves. Example, I am helpless or worthless. Their worldview, the war is dangerous, no one can protect me, and relationships. Things they will say such as, I cannot trust anyone. I cannot believe in anyone. These beliefs affect how victims respond to service and the criminal justice system, and underscore the importance of task forces taking a trauma-informed approach, not only through services delivery, but also throughout the investigation and prosecution process. So in the mental health aspect, it also prepares us to be able to help these victims with coping mechanisms in how to deal with this trauma and learn how to trust again to those that help them, professionally speaking, to get them out of the traumatic situation of victimization. Awareness, acknowledgement, and understanding of this child and youth health problem can result in recognizing those who are at risk as well as those who are victims. This is an important public health issue that warrants greater attention and involvement of child health nurses and professionals in the mental health realm. I'm going to go ahead and I want to show you this video of another victim, a story of sex trafficking and how she got into this situation and what she did to get out of this situation.
He said that I would make $20 million from the documentary, and that it was, if porn was legal, then escorting and prostitution should be legal too. And that once it aired or whatever, that I would and all the other girls would get $20 million each. When I met them, I was a senior. I was a gymnast and I was doing gymnastics. I wouldn't say I was a shy person in high school, but I didn't really talk about relationships or anything, and so I kind of just went on there to meet people and possibly find a relationship, who knows. I can't remember what she really said exactly, but I know she was just friendly and kind of, I don't know, pursuing in some way that she was a nice person and, actually genuinely cared and wanted to get to know me. At first, they treated me very well. David bought me things and bought coffee and just treated me like a friend, I should say. Like a good friend who you would think was a nice person. They took me to hotels and stuff just for fun at the beginning. I just thought that, I have a lot of money and I'll be around people that care about me. I just thought that sounded great. Maybe a month after meeting them, it kind of got to the point where they slowly introduced the whole escorting or prostitution phase, whatever you want to call it.
I think I was kind of just in shock and I didn't really know what to think of it. And I just wanted to be cared about, and I wanted a person to care about me and to be loved. So at that point, I just didn't really know what to do. I think it was about 5 or 6 months after living with them, in November of 2014. I called my mom. She obviously jumped on it of like, oh, you want to come home, great. And she knew that I needed to get out of the situation. They were not there at the time, so that's how I got out. They had scheduled some man to come over that night, but I had decided before that person comes over that I was gonna, get on it and actually leave. So that's what I did.
Great. As you have seen with this story, um, one of the things that I remember the most about the video was that what she wanted to do. She wanted to feel cared for and loved, and she was lured into this situation where she was also given false promises of money to have some kind of value, and it really mesmerizes me because this girl was able to escape, and it's because they were not there. But not all the cases are like that. A lot of these girls are trapped to the point that they're not even able to breathe, so to speak. So definitely, uh, it's something that we should be not only aware, but it's something that it happens under our noses a lot of times in the neighborhoods, and sadly we don't have a lot of cases just like this girl that are able to escape, and so and how much we all wish that it would be every case, but it's not like that. And if anything, this should um, entailed for us to have a drive to work more as a multidisciplinary team effort to continue to um, to locate these girls and help them escape, and also put and provide justice for these girls and put these men in prison, these traffickers. So we're going to follow up with something that I take to heart, because it's a leading voice for the next generation. The story with this girl is that she started as a teenager. She created this movie to teach her schoolmates in her school, her high school, how to fight techniques to defend themselves, because she used to be a black belt doing karate. So the word spread that a young girl was putting together an important film, and in 60 days, she had volunteers, professional crew, and over 100 volunteers, I'll say, and there were a lot of money donated, like 600,000 money donated for this project, and thus came about the 46-minute film called Just Yell Fire. It teaches her how to literally fight back against predators and sexual assault. She put this film online for free and to download, and raise the money to produce and ship free DVDs to girls without internet access. What were the results? Well, nearly 1 million downloads in 2 years, and multiple awards for her film, uh, including American Library Association Most Notable Video designation, um, among other awards as a teen. Um, she was able to use this project and make some money in order to invest to get access to this video, and to be able to create a nonprofit providing teen safety programs for schools, training teachers and coaches in just yell fire techniques. She presents seminars at schools, camps, crisis shelters, and elsewhere. This Just Feel Fire continues to offer this film for free and to download, but it's mesmerizing how just one voice can make such a big difference to all generations and generations to come. Another example of a voice is Miss Gray, who was a victim of human trafficking herself. Before she became a teenager, well, something she stated, she didn't remember the year. She contracted a sexually transmitted disease, and between 12 and 13 years old, she tried to kill herself for the first time. She developed this eating disorder, and as a coping mechanism, tried again to commit suicide, but didn't succeed. Um, thank goodness for that. Uh, she remembers how money changing hands between her trafficker and the criminals here that she was dealing with in Kentucky and elsewhere paid to have sex with her as a child. Um, so she became a survivor of child abuse and sex trafficking. She was able to escape, and today she advocates against all forms of abuse by mentoring at risk youth, speaking to the public, and talking to doctors and organizations about ways to improve healthcare and social services for victims. And as you can see in regards to Dallas and Miss Gray, there's a lot of voices, and we're many of them that can speak about sex trafficking, human trafficking, all around. Let's be a voice for the voiceless. I would like to finalize this presentation with a quote from Ms. Gray herself. She said, "We are failing because we have not identified human trafficking as the public health issue it is. You see, trafficking is not a short-term affliction. It affects a survivor's whole life, families, and even entire communities." And I agree to that. A lot of people are affected by this, and I wish we could do every day more about this situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Today, Mary provided a basic introduction to the violence and tragedy our children face. On Tuesday, April 16th, we will take a closer look at the perpetrators and their lure upon innocent children in part 2 of our 3-part sex trafficking webinar series. On Tuesday, April 23rd, we'll conclude with part 3, where we'll look at human trafficking and the LGBTQ population. Again, I want to thank you, Mary, for being our speaker today. At the conclusion of this webinar, an evaluation will launch immediately on your screen. A second opportunity to complete this evaluation will be emailed within 30 minutes. As a reminder, a recording of this presentation is available on demand at the Serving Children and Reaching Families site, as well as the YouTube channel. I want to thank you again for joining us for this program. Special thank you to the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice for sponsoring this. Thank you.